Mr. David Kariuki. Karibu sana, Mr. Kariuki. We are glad to have you. Thank you so much.
50 burpees. Huh? That's a burpee. Yeah, so I could do that when I was a bit fit. Now things are going in other directions. But I'm really glad to be here. Thank you, Ian, for that powerful introduction. I'm not too sure if these Ian introductions makes you more nervous or they help you build the confidence in somewhere in between there. So, David Kariuki from Ketraco, public sector. Immediately you'll notice my slides look very much public sector. So today we are going to have a conversation about our cloud journey. And so when he said we are doing a shift, is just to say that we are going to just hear how Ketraco has adopted its cloud journey and probably relate to some of the conversations that we've been having. Very briefly, who's Ketraco? Ketraco is a 100% state-owned corporation whose mandate is to build, operate, and maintain a high-voltage electricity grid. And our vision is to be the world-class grid and the leading interconnector. By the way, when I talk about a leading interconnector, in the very near future, we see a vision where a bulk power consumer, like a cement company, Bamburi, who knows, will be buying power directly from Ethiopia straight into their factory. So that's something we see in a very possible future. And by the way, all our lines carry fiber optic backbone, and in the remote areas, for example, if you've enjoyed 4G network, most likely it was carried by Ketraco's OPGW network. So, like I said, we are having a conversation today about a customer journey, and Ketraco specifically has implemented a few areas, the e-procurement on public cloud. We have some Microsoft 365 adoption. And part of our core business, we've implemented it on a hybrid cloud using Esri technology and on-premise. But specifically for this, we are going to talk about the e-procurement that Ketraco has done on a public cloud. So if today's conversation is going to do nothing else, it's probably going to inspire a CIO somewhere that if public sector has implemented public cloud, how about you? That would be at least one motive for today, and I'll have achieved my job. So very briefly, it's a journey, it's a short journey. Why e-procurement? Specifically, two things around this. Definitely, it was in our strategic plan. You know, government, you have to have everything planned and figured out. So we had put this in our strategic plan. But more so, the business wanted transparency and accountability. And they wanted a rich pool of suppliers to be able to handle their issues. So, over and above that, something else catalyzed our move to the cloud. And at that time, we didn't know. In government, or rather in public sector, the president can make executive orders. And in 2018, the president made an executive order that all public sector customers should start moving towards the cloud, towards e-procurement. And that catalyzed us. It was all in an effort to maintain transparency in the public sector. One key challenge that came, and I know the vendors here will know this, that procurement in public sector is highly regulated. We are regulated by the authority called the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority with a 200-page document called the PPDA Act. So one of the key business requirements was, number one, make sure that you comply to this. And 3 possible areas was make sure that these categories for the youth, women, and people with disabilities and all their conditions you've met. Number 2, make sure that you're compliant with all the templates that are there. For us to do any RFQ, RFI, direct tender, anything you do in public sector, there's a template that has already provided for you. So if you automate, make sure you've taken care of this. And make sure finally that you have done the sequence of steps. The steps in public sector for procurement are very stringent and rigid. You have to advertise, you have to do this, you have to open the tender at a certain date, you have to evaluate, you have to award, all those things. You miss one step and everything can be contested. So, on one side, like we've said, the business asked for compliance, the business asked for procurement transformation, they asked for efficiency and transparency. For us at Ketraco, it felt like a crossroad. Either go the traditional approach, what we are seeing on the, is it on the left? Yes. Or a networked solution. Either go for a traditional on-premise, and this is what we had so gotten used to. We have an ERP on-premise. We've already gotten used to deploying applications on-premise, but on this other side, there's deploying the application on cloud. At that particular moment, I remember that movie, The Matrix, where he was being told, take the red pill or the blue pill, and it felt like taking the red pill, because this was 3 years ago, and no other public sector had implemented e-procurement, let alone on public cloud. So it was going to be a first time. So we were to go down and see how far this rabbit hole goes. And that was where we dived in the choice between the two. A simple implementation took about 11 months, but in the first phase, there was what we onboarded all our suppliers, maybe some of the vendors here are Ketraco suppliers, but on the second phase is where we had everything now move paperless. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to highlight one or two benefits that came up specifically from the supply. Let me just focus on that. There were logistical challenges. We sorted out the logistical challenges of delivering and picking up tender documents, and you could respond to a tender from the comfort of your home or from the comfort of your office. Nothing, no physical paper did you bring to the office. Then you could also check on the status of your tender, open, closed, is it in progress, is it being awarded? Then we took care of international suppliers who were being bogged down by timing differences and language and logistics of coming all the way to Kenya just to submit an international tender and so forth. And then you could have the ability to either reject or partially complete an order. If a picture could speak a few words, this is a picture I took from my office. This is the backside of Ketraco. It's a couple of years old, maybe 4 years old. And this may not be a common thing in private sector, but in public sector, this was a tender that we had done a pre-qualification. And all those bits of papers, these are responses to bids that we were trying to sort out. So you can imagine you as a bidder, would you feel even comfortable that your bid is somewhere there and it's going to be looked at and it's going to have that level of transparency? So that was the shift from paper to completely paperless. And this is what we are now doing. It's just people gather around a computer and so forth and being able to evaluate, to award, to even to do an open tender opening, which you don't even need to come to the office. We just host you online and you're able to see the tender opening. So as I summarize the journey, I just want to say some of the few things that we were able to get there were, of course, we had reduced paperwork. There was improved lead time and cycle time. These are some of the things the business really wanted. Enhanced supplier relations, and the ability to monitor the supply activity and performance. And in a nutshell, so far, as I saw, we've been able to process 3,000 orders successfully. These are purchase orders, all electronically. More than 800 suppliers have been onboarded onto our cloud system and so forth. And 200 tenders have been processed and done. Now, I want to move on into the conversation that we've been having. After that short journey, I want to have a small conversation about data privacy and security and how we sort of tried to ask these questions. And as I go through this, this would be my ask to CIOs out there. when you're onboarding a cloud service provider, have a conversation around these areas. So when it comes to data protection and privacy, so how is your CSP, your cloud service provider, handling policies and procedures, for example? Do they have the right policies and procedures? Do they have the right certifications, a right to audit? Legal and contracts, have they been done well where the data processing agreements have been put? And for us now deliberately, because we began this journey, I don't know if this slide is very clear. We began this journey while the Kenya Data Protection Act was just coming into law, but our cloud service provider was already governed by GDPR. So on this table, what we are seeing on the far right is our cloud procurement implementation, how our cloud sorted out the compliance, and we have on the first row the GDPR requirement, and in the middle row, the Kenya Data Protection Act requirement. So this is important, and I would ask customers and CIOs out there to do this because of where, even Ali has just said it right now, we have a very short time. As you can see at the bottom, consent is still in progress. We are working on consent. But for example, on the first one, on transparency and accountability, that's Article 5 of GDPR. On Kenya Data Protection Act, it's Section 29. So you ask your cloud provider, how are you doing this? How are you doing your data flows, your encryption, your anonymization, your access control? On issue on privacy impact assessment, it's also Section 42 on the Kenya Data Protection Act regulations. How are you doing this? Are you going out of your way to do privacy by design? I know we've talked about that in detail. We have issues to do with data protection by design. We have special categories, for example, grounds for processing sensitive data, GDPR. We have the specific clause on that, and so forth and so forth. There are many areas. So what we are trying to do now, because like we've said, everybody is trying to comply, the moment we hosted your data in the cloud, we now have to comply with the Kenya Data Protection Law. So we are working on this to be able to build our case and get consent for it. Second question to ask your CSP, what is your security approach? And again, have this conversation with your cloud service provider as you're moving to the cloud. Talk about what secure software development life cycle for the applications that are being built. How are they guarding against internal and external security threats? How are they handling access to privileged data? You know, we have technicians at the back end of the cloud. Do they have data of the customer? How are they handling that? Are they taking care, at least using least privilege method? How are they doing environmental segmentation and demarcation from the application to the web part to the database? Is it being segmented in the very, very different ways? How are they handling resilience as a core competence? Are they looking out for high availability and business continuity? Just some of the questions to ask your cloud service provider. Having a conversation about where the cloud service provider data centers are, also a very critical conversation. It's just a picture of our cloud service provider and where their data centers are. It's very critical that they are able to show that there is redundancy. On the very least, a customer must have at least two or mapped to 2 or more data centers, and show how that can be achieved. Support sites. How is your cloud service provider providing their support sites? We don't want a case where you are in East African time, but your support is in the US, where you have to wait at 2 a.m. to have a support call. Ensure your cloud service provider has support centers very close to your region so that you can be able to have these very good and candid conversations, especially when you need that kind of support. Most important, how is your cloud service provider ensuring assurance through their attestations? This is a very important area, and this talks about, on the very least, how are they able to show their certifications of their cloud presence, for example. At the foundation level, we have issues about best practice. Which ISO standards are they governed by? At the security description, on the different pillars, whether you're talking about quality management, service delivery, business continuity, or application security, you are able to see all those areas you're able to have that conversation. And above all, the operations part, the SOC 2 and the SOC 1 report are very important. SOC 1, of course, for the financial sector, but SOC 2 report, these ones are the only ways you can be able to achieve this. As I come to the end in 2 more slides, this just summarizes basically our conversation and what we can have with our conversations that we can have with our service providers, cloud service providers. Number 1, comprehensive contracts, where you address issues to do with privacy, security framework, and applicable local regulations. Second, independent audits. The right to audit is very difficult to have in that clause of a public cloud, but if you have independent audits from, for example, the SOC 1 report, SOC 2 report, that's a very good report. And finally, cyber defense, and should have a holistic approach to all this. Public sector, we really love photos and awards. So that e-procurement was recognized by KISIM, Kenya Institute of Supply Chain, because of how we implemented it and adopted public sector cloud. Thank you very much, and I appreciate you all. Thank you.